Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in, from the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Soybeans are grown in all parts of the world and have been a traditional part of diets in Asia. The United States plants and produces more soybeans than any other country in the world, yet most all of the soybeans produced in the U.S. are used for animal feed. We'll find out more about soy on today's episode of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Soy is a legume, much like clover or alfalfa. It fixes its own nitrogen, so it's a crop that doesn't require any additional nitrogen application to it. It will manufacture its own. So as I said, it's related to clover and alfalfa and originated in Southeast Asia and China as a native crop there that came to the Western world, years and years ago.
How has soy changed over the years?
I think originally a lot of the soy grown in East Asia was what we call edible soy, used for tofu and for edamame beans and edible beans, whereas today the bulk of soybeans raised, almost all the soybeans raised in the United States, are for protein, for the soybean meal, and for soybean oil. And there are a few edible beans raised in the country that most of them are exported to Japan or China.
How much soy is exported?
In 2014, 49% of the soybeans raised in the United States were exported. So essentially put it in context, every other row that we raise is sent overseas, and every fourth of that, every other row of that goes to China. So about 1/4 of what we export goes to China, and then the rest of it to the rest of the world.
Do you foresee an increase in edible soybean production?
If there's enough demand for edamame or some of those types of food beans, of edible beans, I think, somebody will raise them if there's a demand for them.
What are some products made from soy?
You can do lots of things with soy products, soy flour and tofu, and just a lot of things for if you have a vegetarian. Soy is very high in digestible amino acids that aren't available, that our body doesn't produce, and that aren't really readily available in any other foods that we eat. So it's a great source of those easily digestible amino acids, and it's also a source of fiber in your diet. So diet-wise, those are two real pluses of it. Well, from the economic side, it's one of our biggest exports. It's huge in our balance of trade for the amount of soybeans that are exported. Probably last year about $20 billion worth of soy exports. And, from the biodiesel industry part of that, there's a lot of jobs, and most of those jobs from biodiesel plants are in rural America, in small town America. All of the other products from soybean oil and other industrial products, are somewhat help supply a lot of jobs, create a lot of jobs in all over the country. On the food side, you would have, from soybean oil, you would have mayonnaise and cooking oils and a lot of salad dressings. And from the lecithin, which is a part of soybeans, you have pharmaceuticals, a lot of new products. They're coming. Lecithin is a byproduct of the biodiesel process, so suddenly there's a lot of it available, a lot more than used to be. So they have been working a lot on developing new uses for lecithin. Some of the products that from the lecithin, you might say, you know, some of your some lubricants are made from that. Some of the cosmetics. They use some lecithin in a candy bar that keeps the chocolate and the cocoa from separating. So that would be something most people would not know. I did not know for a long time, but there are a lot of in the food industry, and I think in other industry too, they use small amounts or use that as a binder, so to speak, or product to enhance some things. And on the meal side, you know, for livestock feed is the biggest user of soybean meal. In the United States, they're really the soybean producer's #1 customer for use in, especially in hogs and chicken industry are big users of soybean meal. Poultry and pork are the biggest consumers of that. And there again, I go back to the easily digestible amino acids in U.S. soybean that are part of their diet that they don't get from other sources, so it makes for better weight gains, more efficient growth. And also in the dairy industry is a big user of soybean meal for the same kind of a reason, and not as big in beef, but some soybean goes into beef production. It's an easily digestible source of protein for them, so at all through their life stage, you know, hogs and chickens would be eating soybean meal, and same way, and probably beef more in a growing stage than on a finishing ration. So doesn't really matter. It's a good source of protein for any form of livestock.
Are there government agencies involved in soybean production?
Well, of course, through USDA and your extension offices on the production side, or through, you know, your state extension services, some through USDA. Probably one of the bigger involvements with the government is on the export side and marketing soybeans for exports. And I've been on the board director of the American Soybean Association, and we are the cooperator with FAS, which is the Foreign Ag Service, which administers two programs that we use a lot of sources from: the MAP program, which is a market access program, and FMD, which is foreign market development programs. And we use those programs overseas to develop those markets and have access to markets to build exports for soybeans through that, and through the USB, which is also the checkoff, administers a checkoff of soybeans. And we have formed an United States Export Commission, USAC, which is the one who has the feet on the ground, the boots in the ground in the foreign countries to supply technical support and information to potential users in most all parts of the world. So that's probably our involvement at the government level, is more through those government programs and through WISH, which is also a program for offshoot in ASA. Which is the World Initiative for Human Health, Human Health. It's a market development program, and they go into underdeveloped countries and help feed people, especially kids, with soy products to add protein to their diet, and then hoping to build a market to hand off to USAC for more exports, for more markets for our beans.
Are soybeans genetically modified?
Soybeans have been genetically modified to be resistant to some herbicides, and also there are some disease modifications to help the plant stay healthier. I'm not much of a geneticist, but a lot of the things they can essentially turn off or turn on genes or find genes in there that are resistant to a certain chemical or a certain disease to help build a resistance in that, and through crossbreeding or crossing varieties and growing that, they can develop one that is insect resistant or chemically resistant to different chemicals. They make a good crop rotation with corn or with wheat to kind of break a disease cycle, and also they help break any insect cycle that you have. Soybeans also, as I say, were a legume, which also fix some nitrogen. So in a corn-soybean rotation, the soybeans will leave some residue, some leftover nitrogen from their production in the soil, which could be used with the corn crop the next year, so which helps cut some of your input costs to raise corn or even to raise wheat if you're in a wheat-soybean rotation. Well, it's like anything else. We've done some second-year soybeans, but I don't really want to use third. Go 3 years or more continuous. Same way with corn, we'll go 3 or 4 years on corn, but to break the disease cycle and the insect cycle, same way with soybeans, you can build up some diseases or some insect problems by continuous cropping. So to rotate that is always good practice, whether it's an every other year rotation or a 2-year rotation. Everybody has a different rotation that works for them, or if you raise some wheat, to have a wheat in that rotation. But mainly it's to break disease cycles and insect cycles. Plus soybeans have a really deep, long taproot, which also helps break up some compaction in deeper layers of soil, and some water penetration down when that big taproot rots away. Why, that's a channel for nutrients to go down into the subsoil.
How do you know when it's time to harvest?
Soybeans kind of develop or mature by day length. So at a certain time, usually anytime about the last of September, 1st of October, when all the leaves have fallen off, they're ready. There's no green. There may be some green stems, which create some real issues with harvesting, but it's mainly just go out and start breaking open some pods and see what you've got for green beans. If you've got some green pods maybe down on the bottom, the beans may be dry enough and they'll go ahead and mature or dry out after you harvest them. But it's usually kind of wait till the leaves are gone. They turn brown or gray, whatever color beans they are, well, you're ready to go. We started soybean harvest and we hardly had enough rain to even measure. After about 2 weeks of the kind of weather we had this fall, we had beans down to 7% moisture, 7 and 8%, and we'd like to harvest them at 12 to 13. So, really a prolonged dry spell really takes the moisture out of them. They get almost too dry. They're more susceptible to cracking as drier they get. So. Most all combines have yield monitors on them that have moisture testers in them, so you can cut samples and take it to the elevator and have it checked through a moisture tester. We have our own moisture tester here, so that we use with corn, and just to double check our monitor on the combine to see where we're at there with beans. But once they get dry, unless it rains, they're going to get drier every day. Beans almost always are dry, but they're easy to dry if they are wet. You cut some 14 or 15% beans if you have a day not like today because the humidity's high, but a day like we've had. If you have some aeration on them, you can put 14, 15% beans in a bin, and a couple of days you'll have them dry. You'll probably over dry them, in fact, but beans are fairly easy to store if they're dry. On maturity, you'll see from early group 3 maturity to probably an early group 5 or late group 4. If you go into southeast Kansas, they'll be raising mid to late group 4s to early group 5s, and then here in the northern part of the state we'll raise anything from early group 3 to early group 4. So, and that's kind of those maturity groups kind of move from north to south in the Dakotas, and up on the Canadian border they'll raise 0 or 1 maturity beans, and as you move south it'll be 2, and you get into Iowa and Nebraska it's pretty much all 3s, and as you move south you go into the southern states they'll be raising group 5 and group 6 maturity beans. So it all has to do with the length of your growing season. Well, soybeans are kind of an all-around crop for, they can be for human food, they can be for livestock food, the oil part can be for human use, and we now can use soy oil to make biodiesel, so that can be for fuel. And there are a lot of industrial products. Most of the snouts and stuff on all the corn heads around, John Deere, Case, all of them are made out of soy. Henry Ford started making parts on the Model A's or Model T's back in the 30s. Started working with soy products to make some of the plastic covers. So a lot of the plastics we have on some of our machinery and in your cars or pickups are made from soy. So it has a lot of uses, from nutrition-wise to products you buy or sell, consumer goods, to fuel. One of the big increases that will happen that's coming is in the bioheat industry. On the East Coast, of course, they don't have access to natural gas, so almost everything is heated with heating oil. And the heating oil industry on the East Coast is looking at converting to 20% biodiesel. It'd be a 20% blend of biodiesel and 20% and 80% of heating oil. And they're doing that, one, to cut the emissions. Biodiesel is a much cleaner burning fuel. And also because they already have the infrastructure there to use heating oil, and you don't have to change anything to burn 80-20 bioheat. And I think eventually, if production would ramp up to where they could have enough supply, I think you might see 100%. You could see 100%. We burn 5% biodiesel in all of our tractors and combines here, and our over-the-road trucks, our grain trucks. And I'm seriously considering going to B10. It somewhat is a price issue with the way they market the biodiesel, but it's much cleaner burning fuel. They've worked a lot with school districts to try to convert school buses to biodiesel, even 5 or 10%, 20% blend, because of the fumes, especially around small children getting on and off the bus. The diesel fumes from a school bus just makes a big difference in that if you would switch to biodiesel. But it becomes somewhat of a price issue, a budget issue, if you can't find a supplier that prices it equal to or cheaper than. All soybean producers, we pay 1/2 of 1% of the total value of a soybean. So it goes to the United Soybean Board and to the our state checkoff boards. And those funds are limited to research and education. So most of all of those dollars go into looking for new products and new uses of soybeans, as well as trying to find better uses and more efficient uses for products that are always there, plus education, plus a certain amount of that goes into education to educate people about the value of soybeans. So yeah, that research program is ongoing at university levels and even private industry levels. If you look at the projects that the USB is helping fund, you'll see all kinds of things. Some of them never materialized, but a lot of these new products that we have come out of that research and those programs that our checkoff dollars as soybean producers have funded. when they started the biodiesel industry that oil was kind of a byproduct, because the real value of soybeans is in the meal. A raw soybean has no value, essentially. But when you crush it and get the soybean meal and extract the oil, then you have two products that have value. Mayonnaise and salad dressings and some uses for soybean oil, they had this glut of soybean oil, and that's why the soybean associations looked at developing the biodiesel industry. For one, you had a relatively big supply and a cheap supply of a feedstock to make biofuel out of. So it has helped the value of soybeans, because suddenly the value of soybean oil has gone up because there's a use for it. So it's been a real boost to soybean farmers and the soybean industry to have a good market and develop uses for the byproduct, essentially, of the soybean oil. Soybeans offer a protein, and I think some of the real growth in our soybean exports to other parts of the world have been emerging middle classes. In China, that's one of the reasons, as the Chinese government has made a commitment to feed their people, and they know they raise corn and soybeans, and they decided that essentially there are two soybean crops grazed in the world in a year: South America and the United States. So there's always a 12-month supply of soybeans. If you're raising corn, the U.S. is the 800-pound gorilla in the corn market. There's nobody else in the world that raises corn like we do. So the Chinese, I think, made the decision that we'll try to grow our own corn and import soybeans. And when I've traveled quite a bit into Southeast Asia, when I've been on the board, and it's been amazing to watch people as their income levels increase. One of the first things that people want is better diet, and they want protein, and if they can get it, they want meat. They want either chicken or pork. So that, and to raise that, it takes soybean meal as protein. So it's just expanded the market and the use of soybeans throughout the world. But also the livestock market here in the U.S. is also still our number one customer, with the hogs and the chickens and turkeys that we produce here in the United States, not only for our domestic consumption, but the amount that is exported. That's kind of a double dipping. You're helping a domestic industry that's also exporting a product overseas, where essentially we're exporting the beans here through the chickens and the eggs and the hogs, products that are exported through our domestic producers.
We hope you can better see the many uses of soybeans grown all over the world and from right here in Kansas. That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. If you want to see other programs in the series, visit SmokyHillsTV.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.